Hey everyone, this is Isaac Steincamp from Chess Seminar Network, and I'm back with another video. With this upcoming week, for me being finals, I decided that I would make a live chess video for today. But to mix things up, I would specifically play openings that I don't play, which could make things rather interesting, especially in a G15 time control. I recently finished my tournament at the Robert Smith Memorial. I unfortunately wound up losing the last round, but I learned a lot from the game, so hopefully that will come in handy in my next tournament, which is the Pan American Intercollegiate Chess Championships, where I'll be representing the University of Pittsburgh on board four, which probably means a lot of lopsided matchups, a lot of players under probably 1800, while also getting a fair number of grandmasters playing teams like Webster and so forth. So I'm pretty excited about going to Cleveland and playing that tournament. And shortly after that, as I announced earlier this week on my GoFundMe page, using the support from GoFundMe, I will be attending the Boston Chess Congress, where I'll be playing again in the open section. And if things work out, then I will also go to the Liberty Bell Open the following week. But for the time being, I'm really excited with everything that's going on chess-wise, and hopefully things can keep moving forward. Okay, so I play a dragon as black, so instead of playing a dragon, let's try something a little bit different. Let's see. Let's just play e5 and see what happens. I personally hate e5. I think unless you're playing a Berlin, you don't really get much for it. But what the heck? Let's just do this. So I personally don't know any Ray Lopez theory. I just know that grandmasters hate the Berlin. So that's a setup that we have here. And let's see what my opponent does. All right, so here, I think you're supposed to take on e4 and then bring the knight back to d6. And you can play like bishop to e7 or something after rook to e1. So it's like knight takes e4, rook to e1, knight d6. Knight takes d5, and the threat is knight takes c6, winning a queen. So you better play bishop to e7, or knight takes e5. If knight takes e5, I think the theory is like, let me think. I don't know the theory. So it's knight takes e4, rook to e1, using the fact that there's now a half open file in front of my king. Knight to d6, knight takes e5. If I take his knight, rook takes a check, bishop to e7. I'm attacking his bishop. I think he plays bishop to d3, and then I castle. And then that's a somewhat balanced position. So let's see what I can get with this. So I used to play the Ruy Lopez way back when I was 1300. Okay, this guy knows some theory, so this could get a little bit rough. So I guess my opponent's idea is that if I play like d6, he can play like d5, and he's trying to take advantage of the fact that once the e-pawn gets captured, then I no longer have that central pawn. If I play a move like d5, he can capture on c6, I'm guessing, with the idea of doubling my pawns and creating a weakness, static weakness on c6. But what can I do with this move? Because this move's clearly not the best move, because that's not main line. So there is something that's either kind of equalizing or grandmasters have found somewhat not exciting enough. If I play a move like knight to d6, I run into the issue that after bishop takes c6, he can take the pawn on e5, attacking my knight, and then I'm in a little bit of trouble there. If I play knight takes d4, then it's knight takes d4, pawn takes d4, queen takes d4, knight to d6. And I can't help but feel that with the queen on d4, it's going to be really hard to develop my bishop without allowing my g7 pawn to go. So I feel like there's not that much compensation there. Let's see, what else is there in the position? Well, what if I play bishop to e7, just close up the file? If he plays d5, I can move my knight, but then I give up the e5 pawn. Okay. So, what if I play knight to d6, bishop takes c6, d takes c6, so I can develop my c8 bishop. D takes e5, and then I move my knight on d6 to, like, c4. And the idea is that queen takes d8, king takes d8, knight g5, threatening the f7 pawn, king to e8, and I've got some pressure on the e5 pawn. If he kicks my knight, I can always go back to b6, and I can develop my bishop. Maybe this is the way to go. So knight d6. If he takes immediately, I can take his bishop, so he has to do something about the bishop. If he plays bishop to a4, then I think I can take on d4 and then play bishop to e7. So I still think this is going to be the main move, unless I just don't know anything about theory, which is a very real possibility, by the way. I personally don't know that much. So here I'm going to play, do I want knight to c4 or do I want knight to b5? I'm feeling knight to c4, so if he ever plays like a move like knight to g5, then he always has to worry about the e5 pawn. If he plays a move like b3, then I can always move my knight back to b6, and at least I can reroute d5. Whereas on b5, there's really not a natural square for the knight to go from there. So this move feels the most natural. Knight to f5 is probably good too, but that just kind of felt like in the way of my bishop. And if my opponent doesn't trade queens here, then either bishop to f5 or bishop to e6 has to be pretty respectable. Probably bishop to f5, so if I play bishop to e6, I don't have to worry about like knight g5 ideas. But I'm doing pretty okay. The one thing I do have to be worried about, obviously, is queen takes d8, king takes d8. If he goes knight to g5 and play king to e8, the pawn on e5 is not hanging because of rook to e1 and then f4. So that's something to consider. So there is this option. But I do remember this idea of moving the king back and forth. There was a game in the London Chess Classic, I think it was during the first round. I want to say it was like Grishik versus Nakamura or something, where Grishik was white, and Nakamura moved his king back and forth, and did okay. Okay, so here, my opponent wants to kick my knight with the idea of playing rook to d1. And the question becomes, what do I do? A move like bishop to e6 could be kind of interesting. It allows them to move knight to g5, but I also don't lose tempi developing. So like bishop to e6, if he plays rook to d1, then like queen to e7, I'm guessing, is respectable. But okay, what else works here? So I could just play knight to b6, and if rook to d1, I could play queen to e7 and then fianchetto my bishop. Seems very positional for an opening that's not necessarily known for being super positional, but the Berlin is a solid opening. The knight can at some point go to d5 once I've moved the queen off the file, so that way I don't have to worry about the pin. So this should be reasonably solid. So I'm going to go with knight to b6. I honestly have no idea what I'm doing, but I feel like white just has a slight edge, which I feel like is what happens when you play e5 as black. I feel like white always gets like a slight initiative. I feel like the same story is true with the French too. Like if white plays perfectly, then black's just in a slightly worse position because of the French bishop. I don't know enough about the Caro-Kann. I know like there's a lot of theory behind the Caro-Kann, but it is an ultra solid opening. But I don't think black can easily fight for a big age without knowing tremendous amount of theory. So let's see what white does. I suspect rook to d1. Bishop to g5 is also kind of appealing, which probably does not bode well for me. So if bishop to g5, I can just play queen to d5, rook to d1. Well, I can't move over because of checkmate. Oh boy. Okay, so if bishop g5, I can play bishop to e7. If he plays rook to d1, I can play bishop to d7. And then I'm threatening the bishop on g5. Yes, do something. If he takes him out of the pin, I'm fine. That's the answer. So, I don't know. With these e5 lines, I used to play this back when I was like 1,000. So my theoretical knowledge is limited by a very low-rated Scholastic player. But I always felt like it was black who had to wait for white to mess up. So like here, I already think white can already look at a move like e6 with some interesting positions. Because now if I play bishop takes g5, he can take on d7 with double check. So if he plays e6, I think I have to play f takes e6. Things can get ugly really quickly if I'm not careful. Because now my bishop on d7, the whole point of playing knight to d6 and allowing d takes c6 is kind of defeated. So maybe this isn't as okay as I thought. After e6, can I take on g5 anyways and allow him to take on d7? Because I still have two attackers at d7 pawns. So like bishop takes g5. So e6, bishop takes g5, e takes d7, king to f8. Knight to c3 seems like a very natural move to me. And then like bishop f6 perhaps, threatening to give him doubled pawns or playing on the long diagonal. This is definitely not pretty. That is kind of obvious. I can also play a move like, well, I don't know. I think at that point I need to keep my dark squared bishop because that'd be my only compensation for having like this really weak isolated pawn. I mean, if white doesn't play e6 and moves the bishop out of the way, I will castle, and I think I can reach an okay position from there. Oh, okay, so he's kind of giving me options here because I also have the move knight to d5. I wasn't expecting he would play bishop to f4. I think that this was a mistake. I think e6 could have been a lot more interesting and gotten really sharp really quickly. We can look at that after the game. But okay, I like the move knight to d5 already, just because it kind of attacks the bishop and asks him what he's going to do. He can't move back on that same diagonal. And the knight on b6 is kind of waiting, I think, to go to d5. The problem is once he moves his bishop, I'm going to have to move it back once he plays c4, and then I still have this pin. So maybe castling is just the most natural, so that way if he plays e6, now when I play f takes e6, my rook opens up attacking his bishop, and he doesn't really have any threats. So this could also be a really respectable move too, castling, and he doesn't really have like an immediate checkmate threats, and I can play like queen to c8. Queen to c8 is probably not a bad candidate move here too. It just kind of feels a little bit more slow and my king's still in the center of the board. So I'm just going to castle because that's the most seemingly principled move. White doesn't really have an easy way to continue his attack outside of e6. So here we go. He plays c4, but the problem with c4 is he can never really play c5. And even if he could play b4 c5, hypothetically, it opens up the d5 square. So he's trying to take away a square from a knight, which is fine. But I'm not as confident. So here I think I need to get out of the way of the d file. I think queen to c8 is the most natural move. He doesn't really have an easy way to continue. He can probably put a piece on g5, but then I can take once and then play like bishop to f5. And I guess the bishop can go to g6, kind of like a Caro-Kann bishop. So queen to c8, and then I can eventually play rook to d8. This is a very slow plan. I definitely think my opponent knew theory better than me. But that being said, like I actually haven't gotten into a position that's that much worse than if I knew theory. Like here I'm definitely fighting for equality, but like I feel like if I knew theory, then I either have equality or maybe fighting for initiative. But it's not so easy to see how my opponent's kind of twist by playing d4 has really changed the position by not playing this e6 move. I feel like this was a very critical moment in the game. Because here bishop to e6 is kind of appealing because I forever stopped these ideas of e6. But then I guess the question becomes, how do I continue to build my position from there? But a move like bishop to e6 forces him to play a move like b3 or do something with the c4 pawn. And this could kind of bode well for me after like rook to d8. Because he doesn't have time to play knight to c3. He has to either play, if he wants to develop the knight, he has to play knight d2 or knight a3. And if he plays knight a3, I could give him doubled pawns and win the pawn. So if he plays knight to d2, I can play rook to d8, and I'm contesting the file. I'm not going to say with reasonable compensation. I am going to say with somewhat better flexibility. So maybe bishop to e6 is fine because it's a forcing move. I don't really have another square I'd like to put the bishop on just yet. f5 seems nice, but it's not really doing that much. Okay, so here I can play rook to d8 and then offer a quick rook swap. If he takes and tries to like take the file, I can just move my queen out of the way again and play rook to d8. Another idea could be to like mess with his structure, play like immediate a5 with idea a4. So then he has to play a move like a4, and then I have a great outpost on b4 for like my bishop. And right now I feel like I'm definitely lacking squares. So the move a5 doesn't seem so bad actually, because it's not quite clear how he would contest this a4 move. He maybe might want to play like queen to c2, but then all of a sudden I have bishop to f5 again with tempo. So this might actually be a reasonable shot to try to fight for an initiative without really giving up that much. If I can force white to either move the c4 or the b3 pawn, he creates weak squares or weak pawns in his structure. So with this, I'm relatively happy. This pawn on e5 is kind of annoying, but at the same time, it kind of like shields me from a lot of white's potential play in the center. And it's not quite clear how he's going to improve his structure so this doesn't become a long-term liability rather than a short-term strength. But I think white's main problem is that this b1 knight's not developed. And so here we go. But do I have the move bishop to b4, kind of asking him what he wants to do with that knight, or does he just play knight to e4, centralizing his knight? I feel like knight to e4 is kind of what he wants to do anyway, so maybe it wouldn't make sense to do this. But a move like knight d7, knight to c5 maybe wouldn't hurt. The knight on b6 can't really do that much from here, but by going to c5, he can't really attack me because of my pawn on a5 now. And he can't expose my d5 or my b5 weaknesses. So this idea of knight to d7 followed by knight to c5 actually looks rather appealing. He could try to trade it with like bishop to e3, but I'd be more than happy to trade pieces in this position. And this can allow me to maybe play like rook to b8 followed by b5 and try to break the structure. I'd be hesitant to play b5 immediately just because I like my pawn on c6. But we can see. If I play knight to d7 and he plays knight to e4, I can follow up with knight to c5 immediately and follow that up with bishop to f5 if he doesn't take my knight. So that actually might not be so bad. So let's try this. So white definitely has a slight advantage, but I feel like the bigger advantage he has is on the clock just because it's a g15 game. Right now he's about 10.5 minutes, and I got about a little bit more than 6.5 minutes. A little bit less time than I'd like to have on move 15, but definitely by having a different position, it puts us in a different place for a live chess game. I figured if I played like another boring opening like in English, maybe the kinds of games that you're looking for wouldn't be available on this channel, so okay, this wouldn't be so bad. Of course, I'm not going to necessarily recommend any of the moves that I played here to someone who's looking to play the Ruy Lopez's black on a regular basis, but I feel like I've at least highlighted why this pawn on c6 and having these doubled pawns off to the side aren't necessarily that bad. But I'm definitely curious to see what the best move is to d4 because I know like most grandmasters are just playing rook to e1 and doing okay. And I would have given up the pawn on e5, and I think the position is rather equal. Yeah, his rook gets to d5, but I mean at the same time, it's not like it's really clear what that rook can do. and theoretically I know it's best for white in some lines to play the rook back to e1 and the bishop to f1, so he can reroute his pieces. So definitely I was expecting equality, and this d4 move threw me off. But that being said, I mean, white has the e4 square, white definitely has control over the center, but is there a breakthrough? I'm not so sure. This is definitely a somewhat solid position. I'd like to see what my opponent tries to do here. Perhaps maybe the best plan for my opponent is not necessarily to contest e4 just yet. Make me wait on that and then try to double up on the d files, and that way rook to d8 becomes harder to play. So like a move like rook d2 seems like a very natural move here. My opponent doesn't have any like concrete threats, but he is statically better. Right now I'm kind of making static moves too. So if he just keeps on making moves like rook d2, rook on a to d1, maybe I'll run out of moves, and that's how he should play to win. But I'm not quite sure how you'd use the d file, considering that my bishops and my pawns block off all the key squares. As long as d7 is covered, and it will be by my knight, bishop, and queen, I don't think that he can easily expect to play for any sort of tangible advantage. Okay, so my opponent played the move knight to d4, but when I play knight to c5, I'm okay if he takes an e6, just because my queen can get to e6, or my knight can get to e6 for that matter, and that would become a natural blockader for the e5 pawn. So when you're in a cramped position, you want to trade. So if I can't trade and I'm in a cramped position, that's probably bad. But here, there's no easy refutation, so I think trades are good for me. It's not quite clear where this bishop would go anyways, so I just let my opponent do it without really creating a hassle. So this does mean I do have to be careful if I take with knight, because a d7 square would have one fewer protector. But I can always take with queen, and I'm doing just fine. Maybe my opponent missed this possibility of knight to c5, but this has to be a somewhat common idea for a lot of Lopez's, since you have this pawn on c6. Okay, so my opponent wants multiple trades, and I don't really see an easy way, not necessarily an easy way, but like a natural way for me to decline and still be okay. Maybe like bishop to f5 would be worth looking at, and then if he plays knight g3, just bishop g6, and then his knight on g3 is misplaced. But then again, e6, is that really a problem? I don't really think so. So bishop to f5, knight takes f5, queen takes f5. I'm starting to get a lot of activity. His knight's threatened, his bishop's threatened. I like my position. So I don't think he can take on f5. So if he takes on c5, my other bishop comes in. And the fact that I have the pair of bishops starts to become more and more apparent. e6 still isn't possible. But by trading his e4 knight, he's starting to give up some of his advantage. And it might be acceptable for me to take on d4, go into an opposite colored bishop game, and try to play against his e5 pawn by playing queen to e6, rook to d8, and just try to keep things solid. So this might be an okay move for me, actually. The other thing that I might want to note is that after playing bishop to f5 takes, a5 becomes a problem again, because he can't really push b4 effectively. So I could probably play around with him on that. I don't think my opponent will ever want to take my bishop on f5, just because when my queen comes into f5, he's going to have a lot of problems. I mean, he could move... Well, he can't even play queen to f3 after I take on f5, because the knight on e5 is hanging. So even if he were to take... I were to take him back and he were to pick the bishop, I just have a lot more activity with the queen on f5. It makes it easier for me to connect my rooks, and things just get easier. So I'll go ahead and play this move bishop to f5. I only have about 4 minutes left. Maybe knight to g3 is the best move for my opponent, but I already feel like by playing knight to g3, it's somewhat of a concession unless h4, h5 is possible, and with my bishop on e7, I just don't think that's the case. But by playing knight to g3, bishop to g6, he always has to worry about like maybe a knight to d3 coming in. But okay, he didn't do that. But now the pair of bishops starts to become more of a factor, because the more that we trade, the more we go into an endgame. And even though I don't have any center pawns, I have the pair of bishops. And, it's not exactly the same, but if you remember the Carlsen-Nakamura game from the London Chess Classic that just happened yesterday, Carlsen was able to demonstrate that the pair of bishops is superior to the pair of knights in a static position. And I feel like without many dynamic opportunities, then maybe this is a problem for white. So here he might try for like e6, but already... I can just take, and, yeah, I'll have a weakness, but I'm up a pawn too. And, with it being on e6, it's going to be hard for him to attack with a dark squared bishop. I already feel like white's starting to kind of lose the threading of the game, because white's not really making any use of his advantage. I mean, even if he makes a re-centralizing move like knight to f3, then why did he make all of these maneuvers? It didn't really make sense. So I think he's starting to realize that he might be in for a crazy game. Okay, so I guess the decision here is, do I want to play bishop g6 or bishop to e6? If I play bishop to e6, I better be ready to trade. But already, by bishop e6, knight takes e6, queen takes e6, I'm going to get control over the d file. So rook d2, rook on f to d8, rook on a to d1, queen to e7, and it's probably about equal, maybe slightly better for white. But also if he plays rook to d2, I have bishop to b4 I can throw in too, which is kind of annoying for him. Okay, so if I play bishop to g6, can I play h5 and then take on h3? Can I do that? Or maybe I play bishop to e6, knight takes e6, queen takes e6, and if he plays rook d2, I throw in h5, asking what he does about h3, I wreck his structure, and then I use like a queen lift. That could be actually kind of interesting idea. This might be the better way to play, especially with 3 minutes left. I feel like bishop to g6, even if I am better, it's kind of like a long haul. So I'm going to go for the more dynamic option, offer the trade. I know that's my only advantage, and I think in a tournament game I would just play bishop to g6. But then again, I wouldn't be in a Lopez position either. So if I play h5 after like rook d2, then he better deal with it. I think g takes h5 would be a mistake because queen takes h3. That's just too much. This bishop on c5 could become a monster on this diagonal, same as the king, and it's not quite clear what the counterplay is for white besides the d file. I feel like, even if white is slightly better, it's because he has control of the d-file, and as you guys know, there's the principle of 2 weaknesses, and if he can't create a second weakness, well then, does he really have the advantage in the first place? The other thing is, by having a queen on e6, not only am I pointing this way, I'm pointing towards the queen side. A move like a5 could become stronger, even if I only trade on b3, a5, a4 that is, just because I'm on the same diagonal as these pawns, and perhaps I can get some sort of counterplay. What is my opponent's plan? And did he mess up? I think he might have messed up because bishop takes g4, h takes g4, queen takes g4, moves the king anywhere, g5. How are you protecting this bishop? If you play knight to e2, I can take it with the pawn, and it's just bishop versus knight, and if I can get over the fact that I have a weak king, then I should be okay. Bishop takes g4, h takes g4, queen takes g4, king to f1, g5, f3, queen takes f4, and I'm better. So bishop takes g4, h takes g4, queen takes g4, king to f1, g5, knight to e2, g takes f4, rook to d3 with the idea of playing rook g3, pinning my queen to my king. Do I have a way to respond to this? I'm not so sure. Well, maybe when he plays knight to d2, I can throw in a check on h3 so that way I'm out of the way, and then I take the bishop. This is already getting really complicated, but with 2 minutes left, what the heck? Why don't we just go ahead and go for this? Oh, wait, no, bishop to g3 is not possible because the queen's hanging. I probably should have definitely looked at that one first, but he can't play queen to g2 either because of the hanging bishop. So, again, the question persists, how does my opponent accurately defend this line? And I don't think that there is an easy answer. I think it's in his best interest to let me provoke g5. I'm going to have a pawn extra, but I am going to have a really weak king. The same goes for my opponent. It's just going to be a question of whose king is not the worst. The other thing to keep in mind, though, is if you try this rook lift idea, when I play g takes f4, I, for one move, cover the g3 square. So this could also play into my favor. It's not exactly clear how else my opponent's going to play for an advantage besides this rook lift idea. So this one tempo might be critical. Rook to d3, g takes f4, and it's covered, so he has to play a move like knight to e2. And while he's trying to take this pawn, I can play rook to d8 and trade a pair of rooks. He can't easily go to any of the square, like rook to c3. Well, then he might run into bishop d4 or bishop b4 ideas, and it's hard for him to stay on the diagonal. I think I might have found a winning resource. Obviously, my calculation's a bit rushed, so I'm actually the time control of this game. I have about 2.5 minutes. My opponent's now down to 4 minutes, 57 seconds. And I think my opponent's biggest problem is if he could play a move like king to e2, I know it's illegal, but if he could, then the rook could go to g1, and I think white's winning. But because of this critical difference and the fact that my queen can cut off his king, I think I have to be better now. I mean, it's not an easy kind of better, but it's definitely a, I definitely have a material advantage. And how are you going to deal with this? All endgames are going to favor me with this extra h-pawn, and even though my f-pawn is going to be hyperextended, it's going to take him a while to get it, and f2's on a dark square. So if he moves this rook to d3, well then he has to start being careful after g takes f4, queen to h4, and I'm pinning this knight to the f2 pawn. The more I calculate it, the more I really like my position. I really just don't think that there's an easy way for white to play. Maybe the key is after g takes f4, he plays rook to f3, so rook d3, g takes f4, rook to f3, with the idea of taking with the rook. But now I can take this knight. So if queen takes, I can take his rook. This is getting crazy. Okay, so rook d3, g takes f4, rook to f3, bishop takes knight, rook takes pawn, and I can play queen to h3 check, and the rook is hanging. And is there a checkmate? I don't think so, because the queen's always going to cover h7 from h3, and I'm better in that line. So if queen takes f4, rook takes f4, the rook on a1's still hanging. The rook is perfectly placed. Like I don't think white's pieces could be more perfectly arranged for me to attack, and I think my opponent's starting to realize that now as his position's starting to crumble. Generally, when my opponents play a move like g4, I want to always have that option to sack, which was the main reason for why I played bishop to e6. Originally, I wanted to play h5 and sack a pawn that way, but my opponent made queen to d4 and queen to e4 rather, and put that on the board, and immediately I was just like, okay, something can't be quite right. And you have to look for these tactical opportunities, and it just everything kind of lined up. When I got queen takes g4 with a forcing move to play f5, he can't block either way because the coordination of his pieces is terrible. So okay, he played knight takes c6. I guess the idea being, what is the idea? He's still going to lose the bishop on f4, isn't he? Okay, I guess the idea here is that once I take, he can take the pawn and is attacking my bishop, and the bishop on f4 is free to move, but then I can take on f2. So hold your horses, guys. This game might not be over. What if I play an immediate bishop takes f2? Well, then I give up knight to e7 check. I don't want to do that. So I think the smart thing to do is just take his knight, because I can still move my bishop and then take on like f2. So if he plays king takes, I can just take the bishop with check, and I'm winning the e4 pawn. And I think I'm on the better side of an equal endgame, just because there's too many heavy pieces on the board. Okay, just as a double check, bishop takes f2. He has absolutely no forcing moves. Can I play queen to h3 maybe and find a way to trick him? I don't really think so. In fact, I think it's kind of critical that my queen's protecting the g5 pawn. If I take his bishop and he takes my bishop, I think he's slightly better. So I think I have to play bishop takes f2. And let's see what happens. He might try to play bishop takes g5, but that might be losing after queen to f5. Oh, okay. So maybe I get a chance to play for a win here now with queen to f5. With the idea being that I'm now threatening discovered check. My opponent's king is limited to either g2 or e2. It'd be great to play queen to f3, but then you forget that my opponent has his queen on c6. So unless I can play like rook to a6, so that you have a rook left to h6 if he doesn't take. So rook a6, queen takes a6, queen to f3. Can I force a checkmate? That is the question. He can play a move like rook to d3, sacking the rook takes d3. Queen takes d3 with check. King takes f2. This is getting crazy, but with 44 seconds left, I'm not really sure if I have an alternative that works out as nicely. Queen to f5, he can move his king out of the way, and I kind of lose the initiative. I think it's important that I get this queen on f3, and if he doesn't do anything, then bishop to g3 is going to force checkmate. If he moves the queen out of the way to, let's say, g2, then I have to take, king takes, and then what's the pawn count? I'm better. Okay, we're going to go for this because I have 16 seconds left and took way too long to calculate that combination. I suspect my opponent's going to take that rook. No, he didn't. Okay, we're going to just go to this endgame. I'm going to be better, but with way too little time to like actually compensate, which is unfortunate because I think like I actually have a winning game now. Okay, I'll play rook to c7, make sure all my weaknesses are covered, and maybe at the right moment I can play bishop to f4 to eliminate any idea of e6. And he's just not going to have enough. I'm going to sack a pawn here, let him take. That's fine. And I'm going to play f6, just break open. Although I might have just allowed rook g1 check, king h8, rook to h1, but then I have discovered check on e4. Okay, we're still doing okay. So I feel like this game liquidates to a draw with best play, but maybe I'm not so sure, because this is not going to be checkmate, and it's 2 against 3 on the queen side. I'm going to assume that I'm going to lose the c7 pawn, but then I can play a4, and I have a target. Let's see. I have 1 second left. There is absolutely no way that I can hope to play for a win. And there we go. That's a loss on time, but that was an interesting game, considering I knew absolutely nothing about real Lopez theory. Am I still drawing in this final position? I wouldn't be so positive, because my opponent successfully got in the rooks in the 7th. I feel like in this latter part of the game where I was just trying to beat the clock, I may have gotten outplayed. But let's take a look at how this went down. I feel like even though I lost, this is still a game that's worth sharing. Okay, I can't for some reason flip the board, but that's okay. So my opponent played the Ruy Lopez, and I played a Berlin because that's supposed to be good for black. And d4 is already out of my theory. So, I mean, here, my thought was maybe knight to d6 with the forcing move on b5. And I think at first it might have worked okay. Maybe knight to c4 was the mistake. Maybe I have to play like knight to f5 and then maybe do a more forceful trade of queens. But he always does this queen to e2 move. So knight to c4 felt natural. Knight to b6. And I can't help but feel like my opponent's done something better because like I have one piece developed. He's got two pieces developed. His king is safe. My king is in the center. He has easier developed than me. I'm always going to be responding to his threats. This move looked good. I think rook to d1 first might be a move order improvement because if bishop to d7, e6 might become interesting because then f takes e6 is kind of forced, and then he can play knight to g5. I feel like my opponent didn't really know theory after this because I feel like if he really wanted to go for something sharp, this seems sharp. Although queen to f6 might be enough to relieve the pressure and then his bishop on c1's guarded. But this is not my dream position for sure. I think I need to reload the game now that I've edited. Okay. Why did the moves just disappear? My apologies. There we go. Okay, so we got the Ruy Lopez again. And I feel like this e6 idea was a move that needed to be played for most of the game. Bishop to g5 is fine. And okay, and here I feel like my opponent kind of let me back into the game. If he plays e6, I mean, I have no, prior understanding, but e6, bishop takes g5, he can take my bishop with double check. I have to give up the right to castle. Then he's going to take my bishop at some point, and I think he has a fair game. And I'm not quite sure if there's an easy way to compensate. I have to do something about this e6 pawn. So I feel like that was the way to go. And in a perfect world, he's going to play e6, take the bishop on e7, put a knight on e5 as a permanent outpost. This knight on b6 is not getting into the game. He can always play a move like knight to c3 or c4 like he did in the game. And I think he's just better. So this is why you should study theory before playing games. But, when you're not playing Grandmasters, they are going to make moves that aren't necessarily theoretical. So bishop to f4, I feel like was a loosening move, and in fact it didn't even threaten anything, this move, bishop to f4. I feel like even knight to c3 was more accurate. Okay, so he played c4, which is more of a prophylactic measure, giving me time to get my queen out of the way, so I feel like all of my major problems have been fixed. h3 was meant to stop bishop to g4, but I'm not sure that this is exactly what I want to do. So I just played bishop to e6, he played b3 because he's kind of forced to do that, and then I went for a5. I have to get counterplay. When you're statically worse, you have to get dynamically better. I played knight to d7, the idea going to c5, either to get a good knight or just to trade pieces, and my opponent gave me just that opportunity. And I have to imagine, in this position, I had to have been better. Everything was working perfectly. Let's figure out what didn't work out. So this was a move that I missed in my analysis. And my opponent must have seen this rook to h6 move, because he did spend a lot of time here in this position. Unfortunately, I spent something like I spent a minute and 8 seconds on a move where I only had a minute and 24 seconds left. This feels like a really clutch move, though, because if queen takes rook, queen to f3 comes in, and I'm pretty sure I'm at least getting 3-move repetition, and I'm getting some form of material back. My opponent's queen is kind of sidelined. Rook to d1 could come in if I ever win this d1 pawn. So this is feeling rather fine, but after queen to g2, I just had to start making moves because of the time control. I still feel like I have to take on g2 just because I'm forked. I kind of knew this going in. Bishop to e3 seemed rather fine. And in this endgame, I've got a 5 versus 4, but with much more passive pieces. I feel like the first mistake that I made was definitely trading the... Why did my mouse stop working? There we go. Was trading the bishops. I feel like I overestimated his sack. And maybe... Well, I have to do something with the c6 pawn because I have to hold this majority some way. So rook to c6 is already kind of passive. And this move, it's too easy, especially considering the position. I feel like I didn't get the compensation I thought I was going to get, and perhaps just a better move all around would just been bishop to c5. And I'm pretty sure I'm at least holding for a draw. There's no e6 in the position. Rook to e8's coming. He's going to have to defend this e5 pawn. At the right moment, maybe I can play f6, then take and play rook takes f6. And I feel like that's how I get my initiative. And here, I must have missed that I was, in fact, probably going to get mated. So here, I mean, I had 4 seconds left, so I'm not going to really focus on that. I want to go back to this position, because I didn't really get a chance to calculate all of my candidate moves. And I guess for me the question is, did I actually have a chance to get some play? And maybe I do. What if I had played g takes f4? Materially, I'm still up a pawn with g takes f4. My opponent's not threatening anything at the moment. I've got nothing threatened. And if I'm prudent, maybe I can play king to h8 followed by rook to g8. This seems like a winning idea because the king can't easily get out from f1. And if I can force him to allow me to play f3 without having to give up my queen, then I'm probably already looking at checkmate. This bishop on c5 does a nice job of attacking on f2. I really think here I'm already looking at a win. Maybe g takes f4, and then the idea is to play queen to h4 here. Because now, with queen to h4, I'm threatening f2 checkmate, and if his queen moves, I have queen to h1, which could be interesting, especially if he plays like rook to g2. Queen to h4 seems slow, though. I like king to h8, and he seems to be in a lot of trouble. I don't really see a way for him to get out of this. So maybe this was the way to go. Maybe I am winning here. This is something that I'll put into the computer, and maybe if I find something really interesting, I'll write an article about it on Tuesday. But I hope you guys enjoyed this video. It was definitely different for me. This will be the first game that I'm posting on Chess Summit that I lost on a live chess video, but I'm definitely not dissatisfied considering I played an opening I don't usually play. And considering how the opening started out, I think I got a really good position. I wouldn't recommend this, obviously, to anyone without prior research, but who knows? Maybe black is okay in those lines after e6. But I hope you guys enjoyed this video. This is Isaac Steincamp signing off from the Chess Summit Network, and I'm hoping that you have a great weekend.